Hello there, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Screaming into the Void. Yes, we're here once again. 2 weeks! 2 weeks I've been doing these dramatic readings for you. 2 weeks today, goodness. Well, I say that. The more astute among you may have noticed that I didn't actually do one yesterday. The reasons for that were very simple. There were no technical issues, I just couldn't really be bothered. I thought to myself I could sit here and spend a significant chunk of my evening reading the story, talking to you lovely people, editing it, uploading it, or I could take my time, cook a lovely dinner and have a nice relaxed evening. I regret nothing about my decision, particularly because at the time no bugger had watched part 1 of this story anyway, so I felt entirely justified in that. But two people have caught part 1 of the system of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether, so it appears I have no choice but to continue. Those of you who have experienced part 1 will recall that our hero was visiting a certain madhouse in provincial France, a maison de santé, and was meeting some of the eccentric souls who lived there, or worked there, or were there, let's say. Let's see where this particular adventure takes him, shall we? The System of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether by Edgar Allan Poe. Part 2. Upon the whole, I could not help thinking there was much of the bizarre about everything I saw. But then the world is made up of all kinds of persons with all modes of thought and all sorts of conventional customs. I had travelled too so much as to be quite adept at the nil admirari, so I took my seat very coolly at the right hand of my host, and having an excellent appetite, did justice to the good cheer set before me. The conversation, in meantime, was spirited and general. The ladies, as usual, talked a great deal. I soon found that nearly all the company were well educated, and my host was a world of good-humoured anecdote in himself. He seemed quite willing to speak of his position as superintendent of a maison de santé, and indeed the topic of lunacy was, much to my surprise, a favourite one with all present. A great many amusing stories were told, having reference to the whims of the patients. We had a fellow here once, said a fat little gentleman, who sat by my right, a fellow that fancied himself a teapot. And, by the way, is it not especially singular how often this particular crotchet has entered the brain of the lunatic? There is scarcely an insane asylum in France which cannot supply a human teapot. Our gentleman was a Britannia-ware teapot and was careful to polish himself every morning with buckskin and whiting. And then, said a tall man opposite, we had here not long ago a person who had taken it into his head that he was a donkey, which, allegorically speaking, you will say was quite true. He was a troublesome patient, and we had much ado to keep him within bounds. For a long time he would eat nothing but thistles, but of this idea we soon cured him by insisting upon his eating nothing else. He was also perpetually kicking out his heels. So, Monsieur de Cock, I will thank you to behave yourself, here interrupted an old lady who sat next to the speaker. Please keep your feet to yourself. You have spoiled my brocade. Is it necessary, pray, to illustrate the mark in so practical a style? Our friend here can surely comprehend without all of this. Upon my word, you are nearly as great a donkey as the poor unfortunate imagined himself. Your acting is very natural, as I live. Mille pardons, mademoiselle, replied Monsieur de Cock, as thus addressed. 1,000 pardons. I had no intention of offending Mademoiselle Laplace. Monsieur de Cock will do himself the honour of taking wine with you. Here Monsieur de Cock bowed low, kissed his hand with much ceremony, and took wine with Mademoiselle Laplace. Allow me, mon ami, said Monsieur Maillard, addressing myself, allow me to send you a morsel of this veal à la Saint-Ménéhoult, which you will find is particularly fine. At this instant, 3 sturdy waiters had just succeeded in depositing safely upon the table an enormous dish or trencher containing what I supposed to be the monstrum horrendum informe ingens cui lumen adeptum. A closer scrutiny assured me, however, that it was only a small calf roasted whole and set upon its knees with an apple in its mouth, as is the English fashion for dressing a hare. Thank you, but no, I replied. To say the truth, I'm not particularly partial to veal à la Saint... What was it? For I do not find it altogether agrees with me. I will change my plate, however, and try some of the rabbit. There were several side dishes on the table containing what appeared to be ordinary French rabbit, a very delicious morceau which I can recommend. Pierre, cried the host, change this gentleman's plate and give him a side plate of this rabbit au chat. This what? Said I. This rabbit au chat. Why, thank you. Upon second thought, no. I'll just help myself to some of this ham. There is no knowing what one eats, I thought to myself, at the tables of these people of the province. I will have none of their rabbit au chat, and for that matter, none of their cat-o rabbit either. And then, said a cadaverous-looking personage near the foot of the table, taking up the thread of the conversation where it had been broken off, and then, among other oddities, we had a patient once upon a time who very pertinaciously maintained himself to be a Cordova cheese, and went about with a knife in his hand, soliciting his friends to try a small slice from the middle of his leg. Oh, he was a great fool, beyond doubt, imposed someone, but not to be compared with a certain individual whom we all know, with the exception of this strange gentleman. I mean the man who took himself for a bottle of champagne, and always went off with a pop and a fizz, in this fashion. Here the speaker, very rudely as I thought, put his thumb in his left cheek, withdrew it with a sound resembling the popping of a cork, and then, by dexterous movement of the tongue upon the teeth, created a sharp hissing and fizzing, which lasted for several minutes in imitation of the frothing of champagne. This behaviour, I saw plainly, was not very pleasing to Monsieur Maillard, but that gentleman said nothing, and the conversation was resumed by a very lean little man in a big wig. And then there was the ignoramus, said he, who mistook himself for a frog, which, by the way, he resembled in no little degree. Oh, I wish you could have seen him, sir. Here the speaker addressed myself. It would have done your heart good to see the natural airs that he put on. Sir, if that man was not a frog, I can only observe that it was a pity he was not. His croak thus was the finest note in the world, B flat, and when he put his elbows upon the table thus, after taking a glass or two of wine, and distended his mouth thus, and rolled up his eyes and winked them with excessive rapidity, why then, sir, I take it upon myself to say positively that you would have been lost in admiration for the genius of the man." "I have no doubt of it," I said. "And then," said somebody else, "there was a Pt2 Gaylord who thought himself a pinch of snuff, and was truly distressed because he could not take himself between his own finger and thumb." "And then there was Jules Dessoulières, who was a very singular genius indeed, and went mad with the idea he was a pumpkin. He persecuted the cook to make him up into pies, a thing which the cook indignantly refused to do. For my part, I am no means sure that a pumpkin pie à la Dessoulières would not have been very capital eating indeed." "You astonish me," said I. And I looked inquisitively at Monsieur Maillard. Said that gentleman. Oh, very good indeed. You must not be astonished, mon ami. Our friend here is a wit, a droll. You must not understand him to the letter." And then," said some other member of the party, "there was Buffon Legrand, another extraordinary personage in his way. He grew deranged through love, and fancied himself possessed of two heads. One of these he maintained to be the head of Cicero. The other he imagined a composite one, being Demosthenes from the top of his forehead to the mouth, and Lord Browman's from the mouth to the chin. It is not impossible that he was wrong, but he would have convinced you of this being in the right, for he was a man of great eloquence. He had an absolute passion for oratory, and could not refrain from display. For example, he used to leap upon the dinner table thus, and here a friend at the side of the speaker put a hand upon his shoulder and whispered a few words in his ear, upon which he ceased talking with great suddenness and sank back within his chair. "And then," said the friend who had whispered, "there was Boulard the teetotum. I called him a teetotum because, in fact, he was seized with the droll but not altogether irrational crotchet that he had been converted into a teetotum. You would have roared with laughter to see him spin. You would have roared with laughter indeed. You see, he would turn around upon one heel by the hour in this manner, so." Here the friend who had just interrupted by a whisper performed an exactly similar office for himself. "But then," cried an old lady at the top of her voice, "young Monsieur Boulard was a madman, and a very silly madman at best, for who, allow me to ask you, ever heard of a human teetotum? The thing is absurd. Madame Joyeuse was a more sensible person, as you know. She had a crotchet, but it was instinct with common sense, and gave pleasure to all who had the honour of her acquaintance. She found, upon mature deliberation, that by some accident she had been turned into a chicken cock, but as such she behaved with propriety. She flapped her wings with prestigious effect, so, and as for her crow, it was delicious. Cock-a-doodle-doo! 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 Madame Joyeuse, I will ask you to behave yourself." Here interrupted our host very angrily. "You can either conduct yourself as a lady should do, or you can quit the table forthwith. Take your choice." The lady, whom I was much astonished to hear addressed as Madame Joyeuse, after the description of Madame Joyeuse she had just given, blushed up to the eyebrows and seemed exceedingly abashed at the reproof. She hung down her head and said not a syllable in reply. But another and younger lady resumed the theme. It was my beautiful girl of the little parlour. Oh, Madame Joyeuse was a fool, she explained, but there was really much sound sense, after all, in the opinion of Eugenie Salsafette. She was a very beautiful and painfully modest young lady, who thought the ordinary mode of habiliment indecent, and wished to dress herself always by getting outside instead of inside her clothes. It is a thing so very easily done, after all. You only have to do so, and then so, and then so, and then Mademoiselle! Madame Salsafette! Here cried a dozen voices all at once. What are you about? Oh, forbear! That is sufficient. We see very plainly how it is done. Hold! Hold! And several persons were already leaping from their seats to withhold Mademoiselle Salsafette from putting herself upon a par with the Madame Venus, when upon the point was very effectively and suddenly accomplished by a series of loud screams or yells from some portion of the main body of the chateau. My nerves were very much affected indeed by these yells, but the rest of the company I really pitied. I never saw any set of reasonable people so thoroughly frightened in all my life. They all grew pale, as so many corpses, and shrinking within their seats, sat quivering and gibbering with terror, and listening for a repetition of the sound. It came again, louder and seemingly nearer, and then a third time very loud, and then a fourth time with a vigour evidently diminished. At this apparent dying away of the noise, the spirits of the company were immediately regained, and all was life and anecdote as before. I now ventured to inquire the cause of the disturbance. Well, I don't know about you lot, but I'm bloody exhausted after that. I hope it made some sense. I hope you enjoyed it. That's part 2 out the way. It would be lovely, and I do mean lovely, if you were to join me for part 3 tomorrow, the final chapter in this extremely eccentric tale of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether. It would help if I could remember their names, wouldn't it? Never mind, never mind. All will be revealed tomorrow. The fate of our hero, what kind of predicament he has found himself in. I hope you'll be there. I probably will be. We'll see how I feel.